knew themselves. And it wasn't always easy. It's not easy to stay in that cell of self-knowledge, and that's what St. Catherine of Siena calls it, when you are always in touch with who you are, both the good and the bad, and understanding that God loves it all. That He loves everything, no matter if we've done something or if something's been done to us. And that we can have that courage then to take that grace that overflows on top of us into a world of people that live just like this. And so a weekend like this can be a time of silent reflection. And I encourage you to reflect on your entire life while you're here. And to see if there are things that maybe we have avoided in our life of admitting. Because we're afraid that maybe if we see it, God won't love us, or we maybe won't love us. And maybe there's something in us that we need to forgive. Maybe there's some way we need to say, I'm sorry. Maybe there's something that we need to have redeemed in our life. And maybe it's just an issue of gratitude for the great gifts and talents that God has given us. But there is nothing, and there is no shame, and this is what God comes to teach us that He will not love in us. And these women knew it. And when you have courage and when you have hope, nothing can stop you. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You will have no fear, and these women had no fear. And when you meet someone that is confident, and when you meet someone that is courageous, when you meet someone like Mother Teresa or Pope John Paul II or Pope Benedict or any of the saints that maybe aren't so famous, you see a person who does not fear losing anything because they understand that you can't lose anything. You can never lose God's grace. You could never lose it. So let me read you a story. This is the fearlessness. I love this story. This is at the bottom of page 1. I'm going to read you the whole thing. And it's a story of St. Therese of Lisieux. A little forward to this is she wanted to join the Carmelite order when she was 15. So she wanted to join the convent. And that's awfully young even for then. And so she makes her dad take a trip down to Rome to see the Pope to ask him. Because the local bishop said no. So she wasn't going to take no for an answer. So she went down to Rome from Lisieux and through Paris and saw the Holy Father. So this is the scene that she's in the Vatican Palace going to see the Pope, this little 15-year-old girl. And she says, after the Mass of Thanksgiving following that of the Holy Father, the audience began. Leo XIII was seated on a large armchair. He was dressed simply in a white cassock with a cape of the same color. I don't know how simply you can be dressed in a cassock with a cape. And on his head was a little skull cap. Around him were cardinals, archbishops, and bishops. Can you imagine sitting in a room like I can? And it's quite unnerving to see all these bishops and archbishops standing around. But I saw them only in general, being occupied solely with the Holy Father. We passed in front of him in procession. Each pilgrim knelt in turn, kissed the foot and the hand of Leo XIII, received his blessing, and 2 noble guards touched him as a sign to rise. Touched the pilgrim, for I explained myself so badly one would think it was the Pope. So she's writing her autobiography here. Before entering the pontifical apartment, I was really determined to speak, but I felt my courage weaken when I saw Father Rivoni standing by the Holy Father's right side. Almost at the same instant, they told us that on the Pope's behalf that it was forbidden to speak, as this would prolong the audience too much. And this is absolutely true. You know, I'll take it aside. When I first met John Paul II, I had all these things I wanted to tell him, because this is my time with the Pope, right? I met him in September of 2001, just before the attacks on September 11th is when I met him. And I had all these things that I was going to say to the Holy Father, and I finally got up to him and I shook his hand for this Pope John Paul II, and I just looked at him and I said, "Buongiorno." That's all I could get out. He just sort of looked at me and smiled, and they moved me along, just like in this story. Because you think you're going to say all these things, but she did it. And here it goes. I turned toward my sister Celine for advice. Speak, she said. A moment later, I was kissing the Holy Father's feet. I kissed his slipper, and he presented his hand. But instead of kissing it, I joined my own, and lifting tear-filled eyes to his face, I cried out, "Most Holy Father, I have a great favor to ask you." This is totally forbidden. Still, the sovereign pontiff lowered his head toward me in such a way that my face almost touched his, and I saw his eyes, black and deep, fixed on me, and they seemed to penetrate to the depths of my soul. "Holy Father, in honor of your Jubilee, permit me to enter the Carmel at the age of 15. Emotion undoubtedly made my voice tremble. He turned to Father Rivoni, who was staring at me with surprise and displeasure, and said, "I don't understand very well." Now, if God had permitted it, it would have been easy for Father Rivoni to obtain what I desired. But it was the cross and not the consolation God willed to give me. "Most Holy Father," answered the Vicar General, "this is a child who wants to enter Carmel at the age of 15, but the superiors are considering the matter at the moment. "Well, my child," the Holy Father replied, looking at me kindly, "do what the superiors tell you." Resting hands on his knees, I made a final effort, saying in a suppliant voice, "O Holy Father, if you say yes, everyone will agree." He gazed at me steadily, speaking these words, and stressed each syllable. "Go, go, you will enter if God wills it." His accent had something about it so penetrating and so convincing, it seemed to me that I still hear it. And this is where it gets good here. I was encouraged by the Holy Father's kindness and wanted to speak again, but the two guards touched me politely to make me rise. As this was not enough, they took me by the arms, and Father Ravoni helped them lift me. For I stayed there with joined hands resting on the knees of Leo XIII. It was with the force they dragged me from his feet. At the moment I was thus lifted, the Holy Father placed his hand on my lips and raised it to bless me. Then my eyes filled with tears, and Father Ravoni was able to contemplate at least as many diamonds as he had seen in Bayeux. The two guards literally carried me to the door, and there a third one gave me a medal of Leo XIII. Now, I just love this image because not only are they dragging her outside, she's jumped into the lap of the Holy Father, begging him to let her go to the Carmel because she knows it is the right thing to do. Now, I don't know how many 15-year-old girls, I don't know how many of you would be able to have that display of emotion. She knew what she had to do. She had a mission and she had a direction. And she risked, she was drug out by force from the Swiss Guard, from the chambers of the Holy Father. And so at 15, it seems that this is an emotional outburst by a 15-year-old, but I don't know many 15-year-olds who would be able to do this, who wouldn't be just completely dumbstruck at seeing all these cardinals and all these bishops and the Pope himself. You see, this is the kind of courage that comes along with grace. And so human courage is not enough. It is not enough for human courage for us to push out all these things that are covering what separates us from God. But what it requires is theological virtue of hope. It requires the hope and the understanding that Therese had that gives us complete and total courage. Because if faith is the seed that is planted in our hearts through prayer, hope is the stalk that begins to grow out of the ground, telling us that something great is coming. And with that hope, it gives us the courage to be able to do what we need to do, to love the way that we are called to be loved, and to love the way that we are called to love and to be loved. Let me tell you what the greatest amount of courage, where the greatest amount of courage is required. The greatest amount of courage is required to let ourselves be loved. Why is that? Why do I say that? That sounds kind of backwards. It's because we need to have that great hope and that great courage to expose ourselves completely to God, to become stripped of everything that separates us from God, that hides this shame. And we all can, again, deal with shame in one way, shape, or form. And if you read 1 John says this, the first letter of John. It says, "It is not that we have loved God, it is that He has loved us." It is not that we have loved God, it is that He has loved us. But we have the decision whether we let God invest Himself in us or not. We have the decision whether we allow Him to love us or not. And He continues to love us, but do we accept that love? Do we accept the grace that He has given us? And when we do, we find that we will have the courage of St. Therese. We find that we will have the courage of St. Catherine and St. Teresa. St. Teresa herself was someone that took a great amount of courage and had a great amount of hope as she went around and reformed the Carmelite order. St. Teresa traveled like no woman ever traveled in her time. She went from place to place. These Carmelite orders were all filled with decadence, and they were just living this rich life. And she would go from place to place, and she would walk in there and tell them that their focus was not on Christ, but on the things of this world. And let me tell you how dangerous it was for her to do that. Her compatriot that I mentioned last night, another doctor of the church, St. John of the Cross, also reformed the Carmelite order at the same time as she did, was thrown in jail by his own order for 2 years. You see, these people risked everything in the great courage of God in order that they might bring forth what they knew was right and good and loving. And you see, Jesus invests Himself in us so that we might have that courage and that hope, knowing that on the other side of every cross is a resurrection. On the other side of every cross is a resurrection, that we may do without fear what we know is right and good. And that is what love is. Hope always moves us toward love. Faith always moves us toward hope. And love